At the Easter party, my daughter-in-law handed me a giant chocolate egg. When I cracked it open, there wasn't candy, just stolen papers from my private life, stuffed inside for everyone to see. She laughed, waiting for the crowd to join her. No one did. I stayed calm. Later, her mask shattered, not mine. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The laughter around the Easter table quieted as I cradled the enormous chocolate egg Amanda had placed in front of me. Its glossy surface glimmered beneath the soft light of the dining room chandelier, a centerpiece that should have been festive, but instead weighed heavy in my hands. Amanda, my daughter-in-law, leaned back with a smile that stretched just a bit too far, her voice oozing sweetness. I picked this one especially for you, Celine, she said, her tone dripping with feigned affection. There's something inside that I think will be perfect for you. Richard, my son, lifted his gaze from his plate for only a moment. His fork hovered in the air, a sliver of ham caught between hesitation and obligation, before he dropped his eyes back down and pretended not to notice. Around us, the rest of the family leaned in with concealed anticipation, their chatter dying into a nervous hush. Even the children, usually restless during holiday meals, had fallen strangely silent. My fingers trembled as I pressed them against the hardened shell. The chocolate cracked with a hollow sound, echoing in the room like a bell tolling the hour. A sharp line split across the glossy surface, and as I pried the halves apart, my breath caught in my throat. Inside the hollow shell, nestled where one might expect a toy or a trinket, was a brochure. Its edges were crisp, its colors harsh under the light, the glossy cover marked with a photo of a building I recognized instantly. Whispering Pie's retirement home. I had seen its roof from the highway, its green paint faded, its windows blank like eyes staring out without care. The cheapest assisted living facility in the county. A place spoken of only in hushed voices, infamous for its understaffed halls and neglectful routines. A note was clipped to the pamphlet, written in Amanda's neat, swirling script. The perfect place for you. My chest constricted. The words cut sharper than any blade. This wasn't a gift. It was a declaration, a warning, a message that I was no longer welcome in my own family circle. The silence around the table grew thick, pressing against my ears, threatening to choke me. Amanda's smile didn't falter. She sat back, one manicured hand resting gracefully against her wineglass, her eyes glimmering with satisfaction. The faintest curl of triumph tugged at the corners of her lips. Richard shifted in his seat. For a fleeting second, his discomfort flashed across his face. A wince, a tightening of the jaw. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He reached for his glass of water as though nothing were amiss, leaving me alone with the weight of humiliation. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. Some were curious, others embarrassed, some even entertained. Yet none came to my defense. The laughter that had filled the room minutes earlier was now replaced by the steady tick of the clock above the mantel, marking each second of my silent mortification. I placed the broken halves of chocolate back on the table, careful not to let the trembling of my hands betray me further. My breath was steady, though inside me a storm was gathering. The brochure gleamed on the linen tablecloth like an accusation, its glossy cover mocking me. Amanda tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, come on," she said with a light laugh, the sound brittle and hollow. "Don't look so serious, it's just a little joke." Her words were meant to soften the blow, but they landed with venom, a joke. My dignity, my place in this family, reduced to the punchline of Amanda's cruel humor. My gaze met Richard's again, searching for any flicker of support, but he remained silent. His fork scraped against the porcelain plate as he continued cutting into his food with mechanical precision, refusing to meet my eyes. In that moment, I understood the truth I had long avoided. Amanda had no intention of ever letting me remain in my son's life without resistance. This gift, this public humiliation, was more than malice. It was strategy. It was a warning that she intended to erase me, piece by piece, until nothing of me remained in this house or in Richard's heart. A bitter taste rose in my mouth, stronger than the sweetness of the chocolate that lay shattered before me. I folded the brochure closed and placed the note on top of it with deliberate care, refusing to allow my hands to shake any longer. My silence was my shield. I would not give Amanda the satisfaction of my outrage, but inside my resolve hardened. She believed she had embarrassed me, cornered me into retreat. She believed she had announced the end of my place in this family. What she did not know, what none of them realized, was that this moment would not be my end. It would be my beginning. The meal carried on in strained silence, the kind that pressed against the chest and made every clink of silverware against porcelain unbearable. My eyes traced the patterns on the linen tablecloth while I fought to steady my breathing. The brochure still sat there beside the broken chocolate shell, its glossy surface catching the light as if determined to remind me of the insult. Richard cleared his throat, a sound that seemed louder than it should have been, though he didn't lift his gaze from his plate. His shoulders were hunched, his movements mechanical, as though cutting his food could shield him from the storm that Amanda had unleashed. He was my son, my blood, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and calloused hands. Yet here he sat, his silence louder than any words of betrayal. Amanda leaned closer to him, her voice light, carrying an edge that only I seemed to hear. "It's not such a terrible idea, is it?" she whispered, though the room was quiet enough that every word landed like a stone dropped into water. "Whispering Pines has amenities." Richard gave a stiff nod, still not looking up. That nod pierced deeper than Amanda's words. It was compliance wrapped in cowardice, an agreement made without conviction but given nonetheless. I glanced around the table. Evelyn shifted in her seat, her eyes darting from me to the pamphlet and back again, lips pressed tight as though she wished to speak but couldn't find the courage. Thomas busied himself pouring another glass of wine, pretending not to notice, though his hand trembled slightly as the ruby liquid filled the glass to the brim. Maggie, sweet child, watched wide-eyed from the corner, her small hands gripping the edge of her chair. The innocence in her gaze was the only kindness in that room. Amanda raised her glass in a mock toast, her smile fixed, her eyes sharp. "To new beginnings," she said, her tone carrying layers no one else seemed brave enough to acknowledge. The family murmured half-hearted responses, clinking glasses without enthusiasm. Richard drank quickly, as if hoping the wine could wash away the discomfort. My lips curved into a faint smile, though my heart was heavy. I had endured Amanda's subtle barbs before, the dismissive remarks about my cooking, the impatient sighs when I offered advice, the way she rearranged the household as though I were already absent. But this was different. This was no longer subtle. It was a declaration of war. As I sat in silence, memories pressed against me. The years I had spent alone after Richard's father passed. The sacrifices I made so my son would never feel the absence of a father. The nights I worked double shifts, the mornings I stitched his torn clothes by hand, the afternoons I waited by the school gates with weary feet but a proud smile. All of it, now dismissed by a woman who had known him for a fraction of the time I had carried him through life. Amanda's laugh rang out, brittle and cold, drawing me back to the present. She nudged Richard lightly, tilting her head toward the pamphlet. She could be comfortable there. It would be good for everyone. Richard gave a muted sound of agreement, a low hum that stung like a slap. He didn't believe it, not fully, but he lacked the courage to say otherwise. Fear, perhaps, of conflict with his wife chained his tongue. I placed my napkin on the table with careful precision, refusing to let my anger surface in front of them. Dignity was my only weapon in that moment. My silence was not surrender. It was strategy. Let Amanda think she had won this round. Let her believe she had shamed me into retreat. Inside me, however, the cracks in our family glowed like fissures in stone lit by fire. Richard was slipping further into Amanda's grasp, pulled into her orbit like a star consumed by a black hole. The others, though uneasy, did nothing, their silence as dangerous as Amanda's cruelty. As dessert was served, Amanda leaned close again, her voice carrying a cruel sweetness. "Maybe we should arrange a visit soon. Don't you think, Richard?" He finally looked up, his eyes flickering toward me for the briefest second before darting away. "We'll talk about it later," he murmured. The words lodged like thorns in my chest. Later. Not never, not absolutely not, just later. I sat straighter, my gaze steady, forcing the tears that threatened to retreat. If Amanda wanted a war for my place in this family, then she would have it. She had miscalculated if she thought humiliation would weaken me. She had forgotten that I was not fragile. I had weathered storms long before she stepped into this house. The egg, the pamphlet, the cruel little note. It was all just the beginning. The weight of silence lingered long after the meal ended, but I was not finished. Amanda thought her cruel gift was the final word, that she had cornered me into quiet submission. What she did not know was that I had come prepared. As the plates were cleared and the family lingered over coffee and sweet bread, I slipped my hand into my purse. My fingers brushed against the sealed envelope I had carried with me all evening. Its edges were sharp, its presence a reminder that I had not walked into this gathering defenseless. I had anticipated Amanda's venom, though not its form, and I was ready to answer. I placed the envelope gently on the table, sliding it forward until it rested between Amanda's perfectly manicured hands. "Since we're exchanging gifts," I said, my voice calm, steady, every word dipped in quiet steel, "I thought it was time to share something of mine as well." Amanda's smile faltered just slightly before she lifted the envelope. Richard's brow furrowed as he watched, his unease returning in full force. Evelyn leaned in, curious, her eyes darting between us with cautious interest. Amanda tore open the seal, and the papers inside slid onto the table. The legal letterhead gleamed at the top, the ink bold and unmistakable. It was the updated division of my estate. Every asset, every cent, every heirloom accounted for. Amanda's eyes skimmed the page quickly, and then she froze. Her smile vanished completely. Her share, once generous, had been slashed. Instead, the bulk of my estate was now designated for Clara, her younger sister, the one Amanda despised, the one she had worked so hard to eclipse in every family matter. A silence fell over the room again, heavier this time, thicker than the one brought by the chocolate egg. The fire snapped in the hearth, the only sound brave enough to intrude. Amanda's lips parted, her breath uneven. You can't be serious." My eyes locked with hers, unwavering. "I'm as serious as the ink on that page." Richard leaned forward, confusion flashing across his face as he reached for the papers. He scanned the words, his jaw tightening with every line. "Mother, this—" He looked up at me, torn between loyalty and fear of his wife's wrath. "Why would you—" "Because loyalty is not owed to greed," I interrupted, my voice sharp but calm. "Because respect must be earned, not demanded. And because no one, Amanda, no one dictates where I belong." Amanda's hand shook as she pushed the papers back toward me, her voice trembling with fury she struggled to contain. "This is petty, vindictive." "No," I said softly, though my words cut sharper than hers. "This is protection, a reminder that cruelty has consequences." Evelyn's lips parted, her eyes glimmering with something that looked like approval, though she quickly lowered her gaze. Thomas's hands stilled around his wine glass, the tension in his jaw betraying his silent support. Maggie, too young to understand the intricacies of wills and inheritance, sensed the storm nonetheless, her wide eyes fixed on Amanda's pale face. Amanda tried to recover, her smile twitching back into place like a mask cracked down the middle. She reached for Richard's arm, her grip tight, almost desperate. "You're really going to let her do this?" she hissed under her breath, though the room was quiet enough for every word to reach me. Richard's eyes darted between us, his silence damning. I folded the papers back into their envelope and slid them once more into my purse. My hands did not tremble now. My heart beat steady, fueled by years of endurance, by the strength born from sacrifice and survival. Amanda thought she could humiliate me, erase me, cast me aside like an inconvenience. What she had not counted on was that I carried more than memory. I carried power. And tonight she saw the first glimpse of it, but it was only the beginning. If you think the battle ended with that envelope, you are mistaken. That moment was merely the spark, the first crack of thunder before the storm. Amanda's eyes told me she would not back down, and mine promised her the same. This war was far from over. Stay with me, share this story, because what came next would shatter everything they thought they controlled. The house was quiet when I returned that evening, yet the silence felt restless, like a living thing shifting in the corners of every room. I set my purse on the hallway table, the weight of the envelope still fresh in my memory, and moved slowly through the familiar space that now felt strangely foreign. The walls carried shadows, not from the soft lamps or the dimming sun outside, but from something darker, something pressing down from within. I lowered myself into the armchair by the window, the place where I often spent evenings with a book or the company of old photographs. Tonight, the book stayed closed, the photographs turned away. My thoughts would not allow peace. The image of Amanda's face when she read the will played again and again in my mind. The way her smile collapsed, the way her eyes sharpened with venom, the way her hand clutched at Richard's arm like she could squeeze loyalty from him. Yet behind that moment lay something deeper, more sinister. It was not simply humiliation she had sought at the Easter table. It was erasure. The pamphlet from Whispering Pines had not been a careless jab. It had been chosen carefully, designed to send a message as cruel as it was calculated. Amanda wasn't just trying to remove me from her household. She wanted to erase my place in this family entirely. My suspicions only deepened when I remembered the subtle shifts of the past few months. The phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room, the missing letters from the mailbox, the bank statements I had set aside only to find them misplaced. I had assumed they were accidents, the forgetfulness of age, or the normal disarray of a busy household. But now, with Amanda's cruelty laid bare, those fragments aligned into a pattern that chilled me. Someone was pulling strings in the shadows, and I had no doubt Amanda's hand was on them. I rose from the chair and crossed the room, opening the small drawer where I kept old correspondence. The envelopes inside were stacked neatly, decades of family letters, receipts, and official papers. I ran my fingers along them, searching only to notice gaps, missing statements, pages gone without explanation. My chest tightened. It wasn't my memory faltering. Something had been taken. The air in the house seemed to thicken. I moved to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood staring out into the backyard where the garden swayed gently in the night breeze. The stillness outside mocked the storm inside me. Amanda's ambition was a fire that burned quietly, but I could feel its heat spreading, threatening to consume more than just me. Richard was already drifting, drawn into her orbit, and if I did not act, soon there would be nothing left to save. I thought of my late husband, his steady hands, his unwavering strength. I remembered the promise I had made to myself when he passed, that Richard would never face the world alone, that I would always protect him, even when it cost me everything. Yet now that vow felt fragile. Amanda had wrapped herself around him so tightly that his own voice was disappearing. The grandfather clock chimed softly in the hall, its rhythm steady, indifferent to my turmoil. I carried my water back to the armchair, the shadows stretching longer across the room. My mind turned over possibilities, each darker than the last. What if Amanda had been forging signatures? What if she had manipulated Richard into agreements behind closed doors? What if this plan had been set in motion long before the chocolate egg ever landed on my plate? The questions coiled inside me like serpents, each one whispering warnings I could not dismiss. I knew I could not face Amanda's schemes alone. I would need allies, people who still remembered who I was, what I had given, what I still deserved. Evelyn's eyes at the table had held sympathy, though she'd said nothing. Thomas's trembling hand around his wineglass had told me more than his silence ever could. And Maggie, innocent and wide-eyed, might one day carry truths no one else would dare speak. I set down the empty glass and folded my hands in my lap. My resolve hardened with the weight of years lived, of storms endured. Amanda believed she was clever, that she could isolate me, strip me of dignity, and bend Richard to her will. But she underestimated the endurance of a woman who had built her life on sacrifice and survival. Whispering Pines might have been her vision for me, but I had no intention of fading into those neglected halls. I would not let my story end in silence. The shadows whispered in the corners, but I was listening now, ready to catch every secret, every move, every lie. The game Amanda had started at that Easter table was far from over, and I would not be the one to break. The house was asleep when I heard the voices. They threaded through the quiet like smoke, curling beneath the crack of my bedroom door, too sharp to be the murmurs of dreams. My heart lurched. An instinct pulled me from the warmth of my bed. I slipped my feet into slippers, careful with every step, letting the old floorboards groan only as much as they dared. Down the hallway, the glow of the kitchen light painted a strip across the floor. The voices grew clearer, Richard's low, hesitant tone, and Amanda's sharper, commanding one. I paused in the shadows, the wall cold against my back, straining to hear. "You need to sign it, Richard," Amanda hissed, her words clipped. "Urgent. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to explain. She'll start asking questions." Richard's sigh trembled at the edges. "I don't know if this is right. It feels wrong." Amanda's voice lowered, but the venom within it carried easily. "Wrong? Do you want to lose everything? Do you think your mother's stubbornness will protect you? If she stays in control, if she keeps clinging to what should belong to us, we'll be trapped. Do you understand? We need this." There was the sound of paper sliding across the table, followed by Amanda's hand tapping against it impatiently. "Sign it, Richard, before she ruins both of us." My stomach tightened, the glass of water I had sipped hours ago turning sour within me. Papers, signatures, transfers. So this was it, the shadow that had hung over the missing letters and misplaced documents. Amanda wasn't just trying to humiliate me with a cruel Easter egg. She was dismantling my life piece by piece, pushing my son to betray me in ink and pen. Richard's chair scraped against the floor. His voice shook. "She's my mother, Amanda. And I'm your wife," she snapped, the edge in her tone slicing the air. "Do you plan to live under her shadow forever? Because if you don't take this step, she'll never let go. We'll never be free." I pressed my hand against my chest, steadying the tremor that coursed through me. My son's silence stretched, heavy and dangerous, as though he teetered on the edge of a precipice. Every instinct screamed for me to storm into the room, to tear those papers from Amanda's hands, to remind Richard of the years I had carried him, protected him, built every brick of his foundation. But I stayed hidden in the shadows, my nail biting into my palms. This wasn't the moment to burst forward with fury. No, this was the moment to listen, to gather the truth Amanda believed she could bury in whispers. At last, Richard's voice broke the silence. "I need more time." Amanda's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Time is running out, Richard. She's already suspicious. If you don't act soon, she'll destroy everything we've built." Footsteps echoed. Amanda's heels clicked against the tile, moving away from the table. "Think about it," she spat, each word heavy with threat. A door slammed moments later, her anger trailing behind her like smoke. Richard stayed behind. I could hear his breathing, slow, uneven, haunted. He lingered there in the kitchen, but no paper rustled, no pen scratched. He hadn't signed. Not yet. Relief and sorrow mingled within me. My son was still torn, his loyalty stretched thin between blood and vow, between a mother who had given him everything and a wife who demanded it all. The war Amanda had ignited was pulling him apart, and I knew it was only a matter of time before someone snapped. I crept back to my room, the silence of the house heavy once more, but different now. The shadows no longer whispered. They screamed. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized Amanda's plan was darker than I had ever imagined. This wasn't just about pushing me into a nursing home or claiming a few possessions. She was after control, total and absolute, and she would burn everything to the ground to get it. But she had underestimated me. She thought age meant weakness, that silence meant surrender. She forgot that I had endured storms far worse than her scheming. I would not be erased by a woman who mistook cruelty for strength. The fire inside me sparked brighter in that midnight silence. I would not let Amanda win. I would gather my allies, my proof, my resolve. When the time came, I would face her not with whispers, but with thunder. And you who walk with me through this story, you must not turn away now. The shadows of that house held secrets that could destroy more than just one family. What happened next would test every bond of love, loyalty, and blood. Stay with me. Share this tale. Because the fight was only beginning, and the storm Amanda thought she controlled was about to break against her. The morning after that midnight confrontation, the air in the house felt heavier, as though the walls themselves had absorbed Amanda's venom. Richard avoided my eyes at breakfast, stirring his coffee until it grew cold, while Amanda moved about with calculated grace, her smile too sharp, her voice dripping with false sweetness. To anyone else, it might have looked like a peaceful morning. To me, it was a battlefield dressed in sunlight. Amanda leaned against the counter, her fingers tapping idly against her mug. "We should think about the future, Richard," she said, her gaze flicking briefly in my direction before settling back on him. "We can't live in limbo forever. Decisions have to be made." Richard nodded, but his eyes never left the dark surface of his coffee. He was drifting, pulled by tides stronger than his own will. My son, my boy who once clutched my hand and asked me to chase away his nightmares, was now ensnared in one of his own, crafted by the very woman who promised to love him. I sat in silence, but every nerve in my body thrummed. I had heard enough the night before to understand the danger Amanda posed, but hearing her slip her poison into Richard's ear over toast and coffee was almost unbearable. She was patient when it suited her, ruthless when it didn't, and she had learned the art of making betrayal sound like necessity. Later that afternoon, I retreated to my garden, the only place where I could breathe freely. The roses, though pruned and weathered by years, stood tall, defying every storm. I touched their petals, drawing strength from their resilience. Amanda thought I was fragile, ready to be broken, but she didn't understand that my roots ran deep, deeper than her shallow ambition could ever reach. As I clipped the dead leaves, I replayed Amanda's words in my mind. She spoke of the future as though it were hers to command, as though my life, my home, my memories were obstacles in her path. She wanted me erased, not with violence, but with paperwork and manipulation. A signature here, a legal twist there, and everything I had built could vanish into her manicured hands. That evening, I decided to test the waters. At dinner, I placed my fork down and looked at Richard. "Son, do you remember the oak desk in your father's study?" Richard blinked, surprised by the sudden question. "Of course, why?" "I found something in the drawer," I said carefully, watching Amanda's face. "Old documents, letters, pieces of our history. It reminded me how important it is to protect what we value, to guard it from those who might misuse it." Amanda's smile tightened, her knuckles whitening around her wine glass. "That's lovely," she said smoothly, but the flash in her eyes betrayed her unease. Richard shifted uncomfortably, caught between us. "Mom, are you trying to say something?" I met his gaze and let my words hang heavy with meaning. "Only that not everything worth keeping can be replaced. Some things, once lost, can never be reclaimed." Silence stretched across the table. Amanda forced a laugh, the sound brittle. "Well, that's sentimental," she quipped, but her eyes darted toward Richard, urging him not to dwell on my words. Later that night, as I lay awake, I realized the war Amanda had declared was not just about papers and signatures. It was a war of influence, of whispers and shadows, of who could plant the deeper seed in Richard's heart. She believed she held the upper hand, that her youth and proximity gave her control, but she underestimated the quiet strength of a mother's bond. I began to plan, not with anger but with strategy. I would gather my evidence, my allies, my voice. Amanda thought she could suffocate me with silence, but she hadn't considered that silence could be a weapon too, sharp, precise, and deadly when broken at the right moment. The web Amanda wove grew tighter every day, but so did my resolve. She might think she was cornering me, but she was only driving me to fight harder. And to you who stand with me in this storm, remember this: darkness thrives when we allow it to whisper unchecked. Share this, hold it close, for the truth has a way of breaking chains when spoken aloud. The battle had only just begun, and I would not be the one to surrender. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, as if time itself had been soaked in dread. Amanda grew bolder, her claws slipping further into Richard's thoughts, wrapping around his decisions like ivy around an old stone wall. She moved through the house as though she owned it, rearranging little things here and there, erasing my presence piece by piece. A photo frame turned face down. A porcelain figure my husband once bought me for our anniversary accidentally shattered. These were not careless mistakes. They were deliberate, calculated strikes meant to remind me of my fading place. Richard, blind to the malice, excused it all. "She didn't mean it, Mom. Accidents happen." His voice carried a weary patience, as though he believed I was searching for reasons to fault her. But I knew better. A woman like Amanda never did anything without purpose. One evening, as the sun spilled its last light across the living room, Amanda sat on the couch with Richard, her hand resting on his arm, her laughter filling the space like broken glass. She was retelling a story, something trivial, yet her tone carried an edge. You know, Richard, it's hard to live in a house filled with old things. Sometimes it feels like we're stuck in the past. Her words hung in the air like a blade. I sat in the armchair across from them, my knitting in my lap, but my fingers had gone still. I felt her eyes flick toward me, sharp and deliberate. She wanted me to react, to snap, to give her another weapon to use. Instead, I smiled faintly. Old things hold stories, Amanda. They're reminders of the lives we've built, of the love that carried us through storms. Without them, we'd be empty, drifting without an anchor. Richard shifted, unease creeping into his features. Amanda's smile tightened, but she masked it quickly, brushing his arm as though she hadn't meant anything by her remark. Yet I saw it, the crack in her mask, the frustration that her jab hadn't landed as she intended. That night, I overheard them in the kitchen. Richard's voice was low, uncertain. Amanda, maybe you should ease up a little. Mom's been through a lot. Amanda's reply was a whisper laced with steel. Richard, you need to decide whose side you're on. Do you want to move forward or stay chained to the past forever? The words sliced through me. My son, torn between loyalty and manipulation, standing at a crossroad he didn't even see clearly. I pressed a hand against the wall, steadying myself as the truth settled deeper. Amanda wasn't content with coexisting. She wanted dominance. She wanted me erased, body and memory, until only her voice guided Richard's life. But beneath her venom, I heard something else, a hint of desperation. For all her cunning, Amanda knew the bond between mother and son was a fortress not easily toppled. That knowledge gnawed at her, driving her to press harder, to risk exposing her own malice. The following morning, I found Richard in the garden, staring at the roses his father once planted. His shoulders were hunched, his face drawn. He looked like the boy I once knew, lost and searching for guidance. I approached quietly, laying a hand on his arm. Son, I whispered, you don't have to choose sides. Love doesn't demand destruction. It asks for patience, for balance. He turned to me, his eyes clouded. Mom, I don't know what to do. Amanda says one thing, you say another. I just want peace. I cupped his cheek, forcing him to meet my gaze. Peace built on lies isn't peace, Richard. It's surrender. For a fleeting moment, I saw the veil lift, the doubt in his eyes sharpening into clarity. But before he could speak, Amanda's voice rang from the porch, sweet as poisoned honey. Richard, come inside, darling. Dinner's ready. He pulled back, torn once again, and followed her call. I remained among the roses, my chest aching, yet a spark of resolve burning brighter than before. Amanda's cracks were showing, and I knew sooner or later her mask would shatter completely. And when it did, I would be ready. The days blurred into weeks, each one carrying the weight of unspoken battles. Amanda's influence seeped deeper into the walls of my home, her presence spreading like a shadow that no sunlight could drive away. She had perfected her art of deception, her voice dripping with honey whenever Richard was near. Yet her eyes, those cold, sharp eyes, always found mine when no one else was looking. It was during one of our family dinners that the full extent of her cruelty began to surface. She had prepared the meal, insisting that Richard sit and relax while she took charge. The table was set beautifully, almost too perfectly, as though she were staging a play rather than serving dinner. Every dish gleamed, every glass sparkled. Richard looked at her with pride, utterly convinced he had found a wife who cared for him as tenderly as he deserved. But I knew better. As we began to eat, Amanda leaned back with a satisfied smile. I hope you like it, Richard. I worked hard to make sure everything was just the way you love it. Then, with a pause so slight it could have been missed, her gaze shifted toward me. Of course, I made sure it was light. I wouldn't want anything too heavy for someone older. Richard chuckled softly, unaware of the barb laced in her words. I forced a polite smile, though I felt the sting pierce deep. She wanted me diminished, not just in his eyes, but in my own. Later that evening, I caught her standing by the kitchen sink, her back turned to me. I thought she hadn't noticed I entered, but the moment I stepped closer, she spoke without turning. You know, you could make this easier on everyone. Richard would be happier if you didn't resist so much. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I won't be erased from my son's life. Not by you, not by anyone. At last, she turned, her expression hardening. The mask slipped for just a breath, revealing the venom beneath. Then you'll lose him, because sooner or later, he'll see that loving me means letting you go. Her words were knives, but I refused to bleed before her. I simply walked past, though inside my heart was pounding so loudly it felt as though the entire house could hear it. That night, I prayed. Not the simple prayers of comfort I had once whispered, but the desperate, trembling plea of a mother standing at the edge of a storm. I asked for strength, not to fight Amanda with bitterness, but to endure with dignity, to hold my ground until truth unveiled itself. The following weekend brought the Easter party, an occasion Amanda seized as another stage for her performance. The house was filled with neighbors, relatives, and laughter that felt forced. Amanda floated through the rooms like a queen at her coronation, her smile radiant, her words dripping with charm. Yet beneath it all, I sensed her unease. She needed the audience, the admiration, the validation. Without it, her power shrank. It was then she presented the gift, a giant chocolate egg wrapped in gold foil and tied with a velvet ribbon. With theatrical flourish, she handed it to me in front of everyone. For you, Mother, a sweet surprise. The crowd applauded, some even cooing at the gesture. Richard beamed, proud of his wife's generosity. But when I peeled away the foil and cracked open the hollow egg, a gasp rippled through the room. Inside was not a trinket or a note of love, but scraps of paper, shredded bills, torn photographs, fragments of my own life reduced to debris. The laughter died. The air turned heavy. Richard's smile faltered as he leaned in, confusion etched across his face. Amanda, what is this? Amanda's expression froze, her perfect mask fracturing as whispers rose around us. She stammered, searching for an excuse, but her eyes betrayed her panic. In that instant, the room saw what I had seen all along, the cruelty carefully hidden beneath her charm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply gathered the torn pieces into my hands and looked at Richard with steady eyes. This is what she thinks of me, son. Not a mother, not family, just something to be destroyed. The silence that followed was unbearable. Amanda's mouth moved, but no words came out. Richard stepped back as though a veil had been ripped away, and for the first time he truly saw. And in that silence I knew the tide had begun to turn. The living room had never been so still. The neighbors stood frozen, their smiles wiped away, as the reality of Amanda's cruelty settled into the air, like smoke that refused to clear. The golden wrapper of the chocolate egg lay crumpled on the table, mocking the false sweetness it had promised. Inside my palms, I held the shredded remnants of photographs, receipts, and personal scraps that only someone digging through my belongings would have found. Richard's face drained of color. He stared at Amanda, searching for the woman he thought he knew. His voice was hoarse when it finally broke the silence. Why would you do this? Why would you humiliate her like this? Amanda laughed too quickly, the sound brittle and unnatural. It was just a joke, Richard. A silly surprise, that's all. Everyone knows how much your mother loves being the center of attention. But no one laughed. Not a single guest moved to agree with her. Their silence was a judgment heavier than any words could have been. I did not rise in anger. I did not scream. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and met Amanda's eyes. My voice was calm, steady, far stronger than I felt inside. Cruelty dressed as humor is still cruelty. You can wrap it in gold and tie it with velvet, but it remains what it is. Amanda's mask cracked further, her painted smile faltering. She glanced around, desperate for an ally, but all she found were faces turned away. The crowd that had once adored her charm now recoiled from it. Richard ran his hand through his hair, his voice trembling. I trusted you. I defended you. And this is what you give in return? His words cut through the room like glass shattering. Amanda's eyes flashed with something raw, fear, maybe even rage, but she could not mend what was already broken. She's manipulating you, she cried, pointing at me with trembling hands. She's been against me from the beginning. Can't you see what she's doing? But the desperation in her tone only revealed what her polished mask had always hidden. Richard turned his gaze to me, his eyes filled with pain, but also clarity. For the first time, he saw the battle I had been fighting alone. I placed the scraps of paper gently onto the table and whispered, "I don't need to prove myself. The truth always shows itself, no matter how carefully it's buried." The party unraveled. Guests began leaving, their hushed whispers trailing behind them as they stepped out into the cool night. The illusion Amanda had crafted for so long had finally collapsed, leaving her exposed, trembling in the ruins of her own making. That night, after the last car had driven away and the house had fallen quiet, Richard came to me. His face was pale, his eyes heavy with regret. "Mom," he said softly, "I should have listened. I should have seen it sooner." I touched his cheek the way I had when he was a boy, when no shadow had yet come between us. "You see it now, that's enough." The days that followed were not easy. Amanda fought to regain her ground, weaving excuses, begging forgiveness, even lashing out when her pleas were not enough. But the hold she once had over Richard was broken. A seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how she tried, she could not erase what had been revealed. I watched as my son wrestled with his own heart, torn between the vows he had made and the truth he could no longer deny him. It was not my place to decide for him, and all I could do was remain steady and unyielding, a mother who loved him enough to wait. And in that waiting, I found my own peace. I realized I did not need Amanda's approval, nor the world's belief in my innocence. My worth was not measured by her cruelty, nor diminished by her games. It lived within me, untouchable, a flame that no malice could extinguish. The chocolate egg had been meant as my humiliation. Instead, it became her undoing. For in her eagerness to destroy me, she revealed herself. The mask she had worn so carefully slipped, and once it fell, there was no putting it back on. As spring gave way to summer, the air in the house shifted. Amanda's voice no longer rang with triumph. It quivered with uncertainty. Richard's eyes, once blinded by devotion, now carried the weight of suspicion. And I, though still wary of what lay ahead, walked lighter, no longer burdened by silence. Because the truth had spoken, not with fire or fury, but with quiet, undeniable clarity. And sometimes, that is all it takes to break a chain.